Your nose is broken in 3 places. I'll need to reset the ethmoid fossa. Try not to move.
We were having a disagreement about the power grid.
I love how this scene shows both how the crew views the Doctor as a non-entity, as well as the Doctor's complete lack of bedside manners. And Lieutenant Carey's grunt as the Doctor shoves him back down cracks me up every single time.
Hold still.
Where is Ms. Torres?
I've confined her to quarters.
I would like her moved to the brig until formal charges can be filed.
Tuvok is being quick to throw B'Elanna in the brig, but Carey technically assaulted B'Elanna first when he shoved her out of the way.
You're to drop this matter. That's an order.
I will yield my authority in this case to you. However, I will make a full report in my security log.
I would have liked to see a lot more of this kind of conflict. In fact, I view this as the bare minimum amount of conflict that should have been occurring between the Maquis and Starfleet had they started off as allies instead of enemies. We saw more conflict between Eddington and Sisko when they were somewhat working together than we ever really see between the Maquis and Starfleet on Voyager. Also, Tuvok is still a lieutenant commander. Also, what is that on his neck? Is that a Gorsh?
Klingons never do anything small, do you?
You do that.
I had no idea that the turbolift doors were programmed to shut at just the right time to achieve maximum SAS.
We just want you to know that if things do get out of hand, we're ready to back you.
In case you want to take control of the ship, you have our full support.
This is another plotline I would have liked to see a lot more of. The closest we get is in the Season 3 episode Worst Case Scenario, and that was just a holographic simulation.
The medical report on Lieutenant Carey. You might be interested to know that the impact fractures along his cranium were pretty severe. If you'd hit him just a little harder, you could have driven some of those bones into his cerebellum.
Being able to kill someone by shoving their nose in their brains is frankly just a Hollywood myth. More importantly, however, is the fact that the cerebellum is located just above the brainstem. It's almost as far away from your nose as you can get while still being in the skull. I would not have expected B'Elanna to be someone who was interested in bonsai trees.
Bond with the man.
I am not gonna bond with him.
You're gonna need support from people like Carey.
I don't need support from anybody.
You are if you're gonna be chief engineer of this ship.
One of the common writing tools employed in Star Trek was to create a plot that revolved around some sort of human element. In this case, B'Elanna getting the job of chief engineer, and set it against the backdrop of something science fiction-y. It's honestly one of the main things that drew me into Star Trek.
But Carrie's next in line.
You're a better engineer than he is.
Sadly, in a lot of modern shows and movies, this would be the end of developing her abilities. Someone says, "You're the best," and they just are. We get to see through the rest of this episode that she really is better, and they're able to do this without making Carey an idiot. What happened to this kind of character development?
Captain's log, stardate 48439.7.
I really like the background music they decided to go with for Voyager. It definitely conjures a mental image of a ship in flight.
Engine efficiency is down another 14%. If we don't get more power to the warp drive, we're all gonna have to get out and push.
Power concerns were a major issue for Voyager at the beginning of the series, but honestly, it makes no sense for it to be a problem right now. Maybe if they had said in the first episode that they were only supposed to be on a short-term mission to find the Maquis, but as it is, they've only just barely started. They should be fully stocked. The most I can figure out is when they had to perform an emergency repair on the warp core, they somehow lost the vast majority of their energy reserves.
Ensign Kim, have you had any luck getting power from the holodeck reactors?
Not yet. The holodecks energy matrix, it just isn't compatible with the other power systems.
Speaking of things that make no sense, the holodeck reactors being on their own grid and using a type of energy that was incompatible with the rest of the ship is pretty high on that list. But they established this rule, so I'm sure they'll stick to it.
Captain, if we relocate all security personnel to Deck 7, we can shut down power on Deck 9 and reroute it to propulsion.
What? How can putting all the security personnel on Deck 7 help with anything? I feel like this sentence is missing context. It should have been something more like, if we relocate those with living quarters on Deck 9 to Deck 7? Or is he trying to say that all of security had rooms on the same deck?
Sorry we're late, but I wasn't informed there was a meeting this morning.
Neelix, this is a briefing for the senior officers.
I am the senior Talaxian on board, and I do know more about this region of space than any other member of the crew.
Why is this scene? I hate that Neelix was shoehorned in this way. It actually makes sense for him to be here. Why not just have Janeway invite him in from the get-go, or have a line about, "We're low on energy, maybe Neelix knows where to find some." Make sure to invite him to future briefings.
We've managed to find a replacement for the transporter chief, but we still need an astrogation plotter, a chief engineer, medical support personnel.
I think it's reasonable to assume that the reason these positions need filling is because people died. Now I'm going to be generous here and say that the only medical support staff that died was that one Vulcan nurse. In fact, I'm going to be so generous that I'm going to say that I accidentally counted the nurse twice in my death count last episode, and say there are only 2 more additional deaths that have been revealed in this episode.
Perhaps we should assign somebody to train with the hologram as a field medic.
Lieutenant, I understand you studied biochemistry at the Academy? You just volunteered to become a field medic.
Tom being a field medic is something that lasts more or less for all 7 seasons. I love it when the writers remember what happened previously in the show.
Report! We're running into some kind of spatial distortion.
Seska is sitting at the engineering station, but is wearing a blue science uniform. I'm going to assume that this is an issue caused by the power shortage, and she had to make do with what they had until they could get her the right color uniform.
Mr. Tuvok!
Distortions are emanating from a highly localized disturbance in the space-time continuum.
Everything that happens to an individual is a highly localized occurrence in the space-time continuum, Tuvok. Don't try to make it sound impressive just because you don't know what it is.
Gravimetric flux density is over 2,000%. If I'm not mistaken, we're looking at a Type 4 quantum singularity.
See what I mean about the shift to science fantasy? Gravimetric flux density? Type 4 quantum singularity? I would have forgiven them somewhat if they had explored other types of quantum singularities, but this is the only time we ever hear about it.
They may be trapped in the event horizon. Open a channel.
So I guess by quantum singularity, they mean black hole. But the only problem with that is there's no such thing as a physical event horizon to be trapped within. It's a conceptual idea that represents the point at which nothing can escape the pull of the black hole, not even light. It'd be like them saying that the ship was trapped within the Lagrange point of a planet. Ugh, there are so many things wrong with my last sentence.
A singularity is a star that's collapsed in on itself.
Way to mansplain, Neelix. Where'd that strong woman from the last episode go?
The event horizon is a very powerful energy field surrounding it.
It is not.
Why, once on a particularly dangerous trade mission to the twin stars of Kalota.
How old is Neelix supposed to be? We never get a firm answer on this, but we know he was a draft dodger, then spent 2 years working on an orbital tether, served on a mining colony for a while, worked 2 years as an engineer's assistant on a freighter, spent 6 years on a garbage gal, and then worked as a trader. Honestly, he should at least be in his late 30s, but I'd sooner guess 40s or 50s, and Kess is still just 13 or 14.
Bridge to Torres. We need a way to get that ship out of there. Any ideas?
Janeway is so pissed.
We have a problem, and I think it's time we discuss it.
This is another one of those comments that should have come midway through a season of lots of little moments of butting heads or trying to bypass her authority, which is really the only thing she has to be upset at right now. Chakotay did mess up when he gave B'Elanna that much authority, but he did nothing wrong by asking her for her opinion.
The Starfleet officers on this ship have worked all their lives to earn their commissions.
Harry Kim has a commission, and he's fresh out of the academy. Hardly all his life there, Janeway.
How am I supposed to ask them to accept a Maquis as their superior officer just because circumstances have forced us together?
That's a lot different from what you said at the close of the last episode.
Both crews are going to have to work together if we're to survive. That's why Commander Chakotay and I have agreed that this should be one crew, a Starfleet crew. Show me another qualified Maquis candidate and I'll consider him.
Oh, so only men can be qualified?
Permission to leave.
Dismissed.
Well, I guess we know who wears the pants in this relationship.
Computer, activate the emergency medical holographic system.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency.
I like how later on this question becomes more upbeat. You could say that that's him developing as an individual, or just Robert Picardo getting more into the character as time progressed. But either way, I really like the chipper version best.
So it begins. Every runny nose, stubbed toe, pimple on a cheek becomes my responsibility. I've been designed with the information from 2,000 medical reference sources and the experience of 47 individual medical officers.
There's that number 47 again. Honestly, this reference happens a lot. The 47 joke aside, this line was instrumental to Robert Picardo understanding the character of the Doctor, how he viewed himself, and how demeaning it initially felt to him to have to take care of mundane issues. Side note? I think this might be the only time in all of Voyager that we see the Doctor's dirt samples that he clearly always kept on hand in his office for anyone who needed it.
How much dirt do you need?
4 samples will be enough. You're very sensitive, aren't you?
I'm not sure how 4 samples of dirt would possibly be enough. You need a lot of dirt for growing plants in, and dirt doesn't self-replicate. Also, these balls and the machinery they're placed on look very reminiscent of the ones that Crusher used when she was cultivating the Diomedian scarlet moss in the TNG episode Clues.
When I first came in, your head was at the same height as this cabinet, but now you look at least 10 centimeters shorter.
It shows that I've been reduced in height by 10.4 centimeters.
I get the feeling they accomplished this scene using practical effects to make him appear smaller, but I have no idea how they did it with the desk. Obviously, they did a great job of making him feel smaller on screen, though.
Lay in a course for the Illidaria system, full impulse.
Earlier, Neelix had told Janeway that the Illidaria system was less than 3 light years away. Even at full impulse, that means she's going to take 3 years to get there for some reason.
Do you think you're ready? Ready to be chief engineer on a starship?
Well, I think I know my way around an engine room, if that's what you mean.
It's part of what I mean.
I love this scene a lot, and this line from Janeway is a lot of the reason why. Just like in the first episode when Tom was being intentionally confrontational, we see Janeway here giving the idea that she's emotionally rejected out of hand its fair intellectual consideration. And to be completely fair, she's actually taking the time to address the fact that as the one in charge, it's not just enough to know how to make the engine go, but to be able to effectively work with those you're in charge of.
I've been studying your Academy record.
Where did you get that?
Thanks to Tuvok, we had the names of your entire crew by the time we left DS9.
I've always wondered how much data would actually be stored locally on any given starship. I like how in this instance we're given a good reason why Janeway would actually have access to this information.
Why did you quit the Academy, B'Elanna?
I didn't want to have anything to do with Starfleet then. And I'm sorry that I have to now.
Look, I'm not going to harp on this forever, but just keep note of how rare this friction is between the two crews. I wish we'd seen more of this. There is a very fine line between what I would call friction while still being true to the ideology of Trek, and going full-on Battlestar Galactica levels of drama. I think they were scared to have much in the way of friction at all between the crews, and they missed out on a great opportunity.
May I request you activate monitor input 47, your emergency medical holograph channel?
That's the second and last reference to 47 for this episode.
Report!
It looks like we're running into more spatial distortion.
I'm picking up a highly localized disturbance off the port bow.
Actually, that line checks out. A highly localized disturbance in reference to a physical location makes sense. A highly localized disturbance in the space-time continuum is being a tryhard.
Captain, according to these readings, we've returned to our previous coordinates. This isn't another singularity. It's the same one.
For the beef I give this episode about trying to spice up a black hole, calling it a Type 4 quantum singularity, I actually like the concept of being trapped inside a bubble of space where you keep looping back on yourself even though you think you're going in a straight line.
Check the navigational logs. Confirm our position.
Well, they show we've traveled 1.4 light years away from the anomaly.
They could not have traveled 1.2 light years at full impulse in that short amount of time.
We can see the singularity, so I tend to believe that the external sensors are correct.
That would imply there was something wrong with the warp drive and the navigational logs.
It would only mean there was a problem with warp drive if they had been at warp, Mr. Tuvok. Okay, I'll let this one drop, I promise. It was clearly a minor gaffe in the script. They meant to say warp factor 6 or something, and I'll treat it that way from here on out.
Mr. Paris, lay in a course away from the singularity. This time at maximum warp.
In fact, this line hammers in my suspicion. They wanted a dynamic contrast between the first speed, where they ended up back at the singularity, and maximum warp. They just overshot the target by writing in full impulse.
Distance from the singularity is 10 million kilometers and increasing.
Maximum warp for Voyager was 9.975. In the 2 seconds it took for Harry to say that they had traveled 10 million kilometers, they would have actually traveled approximately 3 billion kilometers.
So, I hear there's been some trouble down in engineering.
There was an altercation, but it has been resolved.
No, that's not what I hear.
The situation may be characterized as tense, but one could hardly say that they're about to become violent.
Harry and Tuvok make a great duo. I really love how as the series progresses, they naturally fall into a mentor and mentee relationship. You can see the Doctor's projection distorting as he moves his head. On a technical level, I know that's because it's a result of the distortion filter they applied to the scene. But I like to imagine in-universe, his projection is being affected by the black hole they're right next to. This doesn't hold up at the end of the episode when they leave the black hole and he's still messed up, but nitpickies.
I finished my study of the spatial distortions coming from the singularity. I can give you a long, boring analysis. Suffice it to say, I don't know what's going on.
This may sound weird considering I'm complaining about how fantasy Voyager gets, but I actually really like them leaving this open-ended. The universe is vast and amazing, and not everything can immediately be quantified.
I tried sending out a tachyon signal to scan the singularity, but all I got back was static.
B'Elanna, do you think you can work with Mr. Carey to clean up that signal?
Yes,
Good.
but it won't work. I mean, it was a good idea to try it, but it won't work. If the spatial distortions are also interfering with the transmission we received from the other ship.
We could set up a similar field around our external sensors.
Exactly.
I have a lot of praise for this scene, but the one I liked most today is the fact that Carey isn't an idiot or a misogynistic jerk. Yeah, he wants B'Elanna to understand the chain of command, but that's pretty fair considering she just broke his nose earlier that day. His idea wasn't bad, or something only an idiot would think of. Janeway and Chakotay supported it at first. It's just that B'Elanna's brain is able to connect those engineering dots that other people miss, even when they're qualified and intelligent individuals like Carey was. Plus, I like this little moment between Janeway and Chakotay. They don't need to say anything to convey that he's thankful that she's giving B'Elanna a chance, and she sees that Chakotay was correct about B'Elanna being qualified.
It's the Voyager. It's us.
There's no "the" Tom, it's just Voyager. I do love this reveal, though, that they were trying to save themselves the whole time.
I think I have an explanation.
Well, don't leave us in suspense, B'Elanna. What's going on?
And in this case, we'd be staring up at the surface of the event horizon and seeing a time-delayed reflection of ourselves.
Are you saying we're the ones trapped in the singularity?
Unfortunately, yes.
You're right. It's the only theory that explains everything that's happened to us.
No, that's not the only theory that explains what's happening to you. It could have been Q. You could have traveled in time. There are lots of theories to explain what happened. Janeway's right, of course, though.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me get this straight. We were cruising along at Warp 7, then we pick up a distress call and moved in to investigate. But we picked up the distress call before she sent the hail. How could we have been seeing a reflection of something we hadn't even done yet? Am I making any sense here?
Yes.
No. So, we'd be looking for a subspace instability in the event horizon. What would make it show up on our sensors? Warp particles! If we saturate the event horizon with warp particles, we might be able to see them escaping through the rupture we made when we entered.
Yeah, girl power! But also, warp particles? Warp field, yes, I understand that made-up theory, but how would that create particles that could be turned into a beam? I don't have an issue with the solution the episode is presenting of doing something to find the initial crack they made. It's just that they lose me at shooting warp particles around.
Mr. Paris, bring us closer.
Captain, if we get too close to the rupture, our warp engines might make it collapse even further.
Here's another one of those cuts where Janeway didn't have her hands on her hips, and when the camera came back to her, she suddenly had her hands on her hips.
Getting there is the easy part, Mr. Paris. We need someone who's familiar with the finer points of temporal mechanics. And unless you've been hiding your credentials, I don't think that's you.
Yeah, girl power! No, actually. Star Trek used to be an ensemble show, and this episode is doing a good job of giving each character, mainly B'Elanna, but still, a chance to excel where they're qualified without being the best at everything.
And believe me, no one was sorry to see me go.
Professor Chapman was. Professor Chapman wasn't alone. Many of your teachers thought you had the potential to be an outstanding officer. You had more friends at the Academy than you realized.
This is a really important message for a lot of people. Sometimes we get caught up in our own feelings of worthlessness that we lose sight of the fact that there is no such thing as a worthless person. That there's a creator who cares about your immortal soul and sent his son to die in your place. Not that Star Trek would talk about that latter half outside one episode in the original series, but it's still true.
I'm afraid you have it all wrong, Mr. Spock, all of you. The Empire spokesman trying to ridicule their religion. But he couldn't. Don't you understand? It's not the sun up in the sky. It's the Son of God.
We widened the opening by over 65%. I'd like another 5 for safety.
When they found the rupture, it was 50 by 10 meters. Voyager is 118 meters by around 50 meters. To widen the rupture by 70% would make it 85 by 17 meters. That's not enough for Voyager to get through.
I don't think we're gonna get any more, Captain.
Why did all the turbulence stop?
The rupture's now 120 meters in diameter. That leaves us with less than 2 meters clearance on either side.
Well, even if the percentage of increase was wrong, Harry gets the actual width correct for Voyager to make it through.
One of them is a temporal reflection. But which one? I'm getting identical readings from both ships.
This line doesn't really make sense for two reasons. First of all, up until now, they've indicated that there was no way to communicate with or get readings from the temporal reflection. The fact that they can scan the reflection implies they could communicate with it as well, that it is a physical and real entity. More importantly, however, the reflection should show two more life signs than the real Voyager, B'Elanna and the Captain.
Don't you see? Voyager did move toward the rupture 20 minutes ago when we first discovered it. That's why the port ship is moving toward it now. It's a time-delayed reflection of what we did before. The starboard ship's the real one.
I don't know how many times I've watched this episode, and this explanation of their logic has always been off to me. I finally realized what it was while writing this out. The time delay was established to predate the cause earlier in the episode. So instead of them seeing Voyager moving toward the rupture, since that's what they did 20 minutes ago, it should have been them seeing Voyager moving toward the rupture to leave after Janeway and B'Elanna were already on board. That way the effect comes before the cause again. Here's that perspective thing I mentioned again. According to this shot, Voyager has a single shuttle bay that is just large enough for a single shuttlecraft. But at this point, Voyager has a Class 2, a Type 6, and a Type 8 shuttlecraft, plus Neelix's ship.
Lieutenant. Congratulations. Welcome aboard.
I really love that Carrie wasn't a jerk. B'Elanna isn't amazing because Carrie was an idiot. She's amazing because, for as good as Carrie is, she was just a little bit better.
Are you checking up on your new chief engineer?
Observing.
And?
2 crew members have already filed complaints about her promotion.
At the same time, I like that they aren't pretending like everyone is magnanimous. Some people would be pissed, and I like that they acknowledge it, even if it was just this one comment.
But I think B'Elanna is going to make a fine addition to this crew. Our crew.
It's still too soon to have this sort of comment, though. It would have been nicer if it came after half a season, at least, of difficulties between the two crews.
If things had happened differently, and we were on the Maquis ship now instead of Voyager, would you have served under me?
One of the nice things about being captain is that you can keep some things to yourself.
Well, I guess we know who wears the pants in this relationship.
You know, I like you better this way.
Two things I like about this scene is the way the Doctor is still being treated like a thing. His recognition as a crew member was given a lot of time to develop. I always felt like this storyline had a good pacing to it. The other thing I like is, just like the original series, this episode ends with a joke, and I feel like the fact that they followed this up with a subtle inclusion of the original Star Trek theme is a nod to that. Now overall, Parallax is a fun episode. Brannon Braga commented that they knew they needed to do a Maquis Starfleet adjustment episode, and he felt it needed to come early. I agree. They needed a bonding episode, but I think it was a waste to have it come early and crazy to have it come on the second episode. Thankfully, over the course of 7 seasons, this ultimately was just a missed opportunity and wasn't detrimental to the run of the series. Also, apparently this was the first bottle show of Voyager.
Didn't anybody here build ships in bottles when they were boys?
I did, sir.
That's rough since it's only the second episode, but after how much the first episode cost from reshooting, some of which actually happened while they were shooting this episode, the need for a low-budget episode makes a lot of sense. And for being a bottle show, I think it holds up well. No one is acting horribly out of character, and the plot, minus some rough edges, holds up. The one downside to this is I think this episode set the tone for bad science. In fact, Braga commented that he lost no sleep at all over the use of technobabble in the episode, and was more concerned about dramatizing the plot itself. He's been on record saying, I could have called it a quantum fissure, a quantum sinkhole, anything, and who cares? Who really cares? Well, I care. And I think that this attitude showed a misunderstanding of the fan base. And I know there were a fair number of fans who watched TOS, TNG, and DS9, but drew the line at Voyager. I think this attitude for the fans is a big reason as to why that occurred. Alright, that's it for this episode. Shout out to my supporters on Subscribestar and Patreon, which, according to my notes, is John DeMarco. If you like this and want to see more, you can join John by searching for Life with Matthew on Patreon or Subscribestar, or just click on the links in the description of the video. Be sure to subscribe for more, and until the next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.